Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of the In the Oven Show. Today we have a person who's been in real estate for a recent time, but started off with an interest in biology at school. She's been in commercial real estate for about 7 years, give or take, representing tenants, doing negotiations, knows the Calgary commercial and industrial real estate market like the back of her hand. So I'd like to introduce Kaile Landry to the show. How are you doing, Kaile?
Good, thanks.
How are things?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm happy that I'm the first female to be on your show. And this is my first interview as well. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess why did you pick to work in real estate?
Well, I grew up as more of a tomboy, and most people don't know that about me. I grew up listening to classic rock and tinkering around in the garage. So I kind of led towards industrial real estate just naturally, based on how I grew up, what I did. I'd like to decompose and reconstruct things, and ended up really wanting to help businesses to weather the storm in Calgary, because it's a pretty treacherous storm that we have most days. So, yeah.
How did you get inspired to go into real estate specifically? Like, was there a moment like at school or a conversation with a friend or someone that you knew?
The way I started is I actually was on maternity leave and didn't really think I had any long-term potential for growth. So decided to try something else. I had 2 people tell me that I should try real estate. I think they were more referring to the residential side of things. So I did the course and knew in my heart that I couldn't do residential. It just wasn't where I wanted to be. But I'm a math and physics science person, so thought that commercial real estate would be the way to go. Had an entry into the industrial world to start and really enjoyed it. So that's where I sat and stayed.
So you started in Calgary and you were born here and you were educated here. Did you find that real estate was promoted as an industry at like colleges, universities and school? Like, as to what pulls someone into that from maybe like a fully technical background?
Yeah, I think it was more, I was misguided. I'm on maternity leave, figuring out what makes the most financial sense for the family, and decided, because I have some sales background experience, and people told me that I should try it out and see how it goes. I kind of took a leap of faith and dove in head first and haven't really looked back since.
Can you tell me a little bit about the company you work for and what you kind of do day to day?
Yeah, so the brokerage side that I work for is NAI Advent. We have kind of subsets of teams and people underneath that umbrella of the brokerage. My team specifically is called Calgary Commercial Group. So what we do is, and we have a whole website designed for tenants, buyers, sellers, landlords. Even if you're looking for development land or to do a design build facility, we have all areas covered of the of the commercial market. Mm-hmm. And my day-to-day what I do day-to-day is mostly right now is just taking calls. It's a good problem to have, to be able to take calls, but a lot of people looking right now, despite the pandemic.
What are the differences between residential, commercial, and industrial from a real estate perspective, from your perspective?
Yeah, they're very different. Residential typically transacts, let's say from start to finish, it's 60 to 90 days on average. Our industrial or commercial transaction can take upwards of 2 to 3 years sometimes. I've been part of some of those, which it feels like it drags on forever, but there's so many different aspects of commercial that you need to be aware of, and that's where I caution people looking on their own to try to get at least some advice or a guideline on how to do it.
So what are those things that you say to a client that you're walking through, or someone that's hesitant about taking on that advice, I guess?
Yeah, everybody is who they are, and I don't give unsolicited advice, which is kind of counterintuitive to what I do, because people, you need to be out there. You need to get people to know your name, and social media presence just isn't one thing that I think I'm very good at. I do post, but if people don't want the advice that I give or the education side of things, I kind of just leave it alone and say, when you're ready, come to me and I'll be here waiting. I'm a very patient person, which I've been told by many people. So it's not usual to find somebody with patience in this industry, but I think that's one of my strengths, is that people can come to me when they want. And I try to have my pulse on every aspect of the market so that when they do come, or if they come, I can give them proper advice and kind of guide them through and figure out what they want to do.
I bet it's hard to be patient though.
Extremely, yeah. With 100% commission, not having stable income,
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult. Having a family to take care of, I used to be very risk averse, and now I don't mind taking more risk, just because I know the more risk you take and the more money you spend on things, usually the more return you get.
The pandemic and real estate, I'm just intrigued as to what's been panning out. Maybe we focus on Calgary rather than everything. But what's your experience been in terms of, the start of the pandemic to now, and what the general feeling is in the commercial industrial world?
Right. The pandemic, when it first started, when it was first announced in March of 2020, there was the obvious lull of everybody staying home in quarantine, not able to go anywhere. Businesses shut down. There was really nothing to do. So with that, it was very, very quiet. I was concerned for my job and safety and to provide for my family. And not only that, I was homeschooling, or basically homeschooling my children at the same time as trying to work. So, or not work, excuse me.
What was that like? I'm intrigued. I don't have kids, but I just wondered, balancing those two sounds like an impossible task.
It was extremely difficult. I am fortunate that I have two slightly older children, so they're a little bit more responsible. But so they're 8 and 10, and they can kind of self-manage on the computer. They know computers better than I do sometimes, so I just thought, hey, here you go. As long as we have a schedule of what's going to happen, you guys can check in and do your thing, then we're good. I can work. So after that whole hurdle of quarantine and homeschooling as a single mother, which was also very fun, about June 1st, when they announced that the phased reopening would happen, that's when a light switch flicked in the industrial markets. And everybody was on the phones, everybody was on the internet searching for space. And so I saw firsthand kind of when the economy shifts, or when it shifted. And that's a great part of my job and my role, is that I get to witness and be a part of that economic diversification. So that happened about June 1, and then another wave in about August, September. And since then, it's been moving very rapidly ever since.
And has that been specific sectors? Have you seen a change of industries, between or pre-pandemic and then now?
Well, residential, as you know, has picked up quite a bit. We're now, I guess, an article released yesterday said we're in a balanced market. But industrial was the quickest to pick up the pace. And a lot of that came from the increased demand from e-commerce. So warehousing and distribution facilities started leasing up very quickly. Any type of shipping or freight or local deliveries or even nationwide or global deliveries increased. So we saw a lot of movement on the e-commerce side of things. and industrial markets picked up. So with that, and today as it stands, we have a lot less available to lease or buy. And most people feel that, well, we're in a pandemic, landlords should be giving us a deal or a break, and it really doesn't work that way. From my perspective, things are really, really good. And it's hard for people to find space, especially the startups, which is unfortunate.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I've always had this perception, and I've talked about in a previous episode, is that in times of hardship, pandemic, global financial crises, people start companies, they do that startup thing. But this time seems a bit different. It seems like there was just a bit of turn things off for a bit, we'll see what's going on, and then everyone's kind of ready to pounce and go for it. And everyone seems to have adapted a lot quicker. I know it's a different kind of crisis to say 2007, 2008, but like it seems like people are kind of ready and know what to do.
Yeah, you know what, from my perspective, 2020 was the kind of sit back and hold on, especially for the bigger players, the investors, the larger companies. For the small and mid-sized companies and the startups, that's where 2020 was most active in that area. Once January 2021 hit, it was all of the investors, everybody that wanted to make a move in 2020 but waited to kind of see what played out. They started coming into the picture and looking. And so there's been a lot of huge moves. There's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening just to weather the storm. Or to diversify the offerings that a company can give and provide. So there's been some really great things that have come out of this.
Are companies moving into the area?
The way that it works in Calgary, typically, despite the pandemic, is we're a good hub for transport and logistics. So Vancouver and BC, they like to try to lease space in Calgary, especially if they need to ship it towards the east or distribute it all throughout. And kind of the reverse works as well, where the Maritimes and Ontario areas, they can also create a hub in Calgary, and it's accessible, it's easy. And yeah, we've seen more and more of that, especially with Vancouver and the port and needing to store sea cans and crates and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's good to see. I've noticed there's been a lot more presence of, say, pushing the film industry and like construction of film industry buildings and them moving in, which is exciting for me, having all that start to be more of a thing. Because Vancouver was always seen as it was always the mock New York or something. It was always the place people went to film in Canada.
Yeah.
But like Calgary could now start to be that thing, which is quite exciting.
Completely. Calgary, they, during this pandemic, leased quite a bit of space up, big warehouse spaces to the film industry. So it's exciting to put Calgary a bit more on the map. Yeah,
to just diversify and be known for more than just oil and gas. I know it's a fundamental part of what we do, but to be seen as more of a technology city and a film industry, and it's exciting. I mean, I'm relatively new to the Calgary economy, and I'm always intrigued on the show to dig into people's experiences. And what are your feelings on working in real estate in the Calgary economy?
There's ups and downs. A lot of Calgarians talk about the ebbs and flows of the economy, but it's a very livable city, and it's quite affordable compared to places like Vancouver. So, we're going to see a huge uptick, in my opinion, in the tech and AI industry coming in and leasing up more of the downtown office buildings that are vacant. And I still believe we're going to be heavily relying on oil and gas for the next, let's say, 30 years at least. So I don't see that going away anytime soon, but the kick to provide other avenues and alternative energy sources is still very much there and very real.
You were in real estate when there was the last oil and gas crash, and then there's been this one, and you weren't doing it probably 2007, 2008, but like, what's it been like living through that because you obviously work on commission-based, and like, what's that been like?
Yeah, the way I started in the tail end of 2014, and that was just when the economy depressed.
Yeah.
And I was essentially a cold caller in an industry where you can, well, most of the people that are in this industry are a little bit older and old school. So they said, get on the phone, call, and see what you can drum up for business. And that's what I did. I made targets and I set them and achieved certain calls per day, made sure that I made meaningful contact, and hoped that somebody would call me back if I didn't get through, or hoped that they would like what I said to them and would want to take a chance. And that's how I got most of my business in 2016 to, let's say, 18, is through just plain old cold calling.
What have you learned through that process of starting off with cold calling, and seems to be obviously a part of what you have to do? Like, what tips do you have for people? That's obviously a daunting part of business.
It is, and most people don't want to do it, which is why I did it. Because I want to be the person to kind of fly under the radar without anybody knowing and just surprise them, and also have this abundance of knowledge and information. So with that experience, what it taught me was to push your ego aside, and that rejection is imminent, and ultimately it's a numbers game. So the more calls you make, the more likely you're going to land something or land a client. And then once you land a client, then there's the whole pipeline of where it can fall apart, which is very different from residential in that sense.
Yeah.
Because there's conditions, and there's approvals, there's permits, there's inspections, and all of these things factor into successfully moving a person or a tenant or business into a space.
Because you seem to have been someone that thinks carefully about how you approach things and want to do things differently. And I know a lot of people say that, but they don't. But it seems like you are. What things do you think now, through the process of you in your career, what has changed dramatically in the real estate business? Well,
we were talking earlier about the economic dip in 2015. Now I'm in a space in this industry where I'm sought after, which is very unusual for me. I had to grind and call and be on the phone every day, trying to hope that somebody would want to talk to me and see value in what I said. And that's ultimately how I gained business. But now, being 2020 and up, post-pandemic, it's been a very nice change to not have to really dig as hard, but still know that that's an area that should have care and attention. Just nice to be able to be called and sought after. So it's been a 180 shift since I started to where it is now, and all of that is really just economic dependent.
Mm. It's interesting, isn't it? Because you are at the mercy of the economy to a certain extent.
Yeah, I say I'm the pulse of the economic changes. I see firsthand how it happens, and I'm the one that puts people into spaces and works with businesses. I just put a business from Montreal into a new Calgary office, so location, and it's exciting to see the growth happening.
So what kind of changes have happened in the real estate industry as a whole? Like, has there much changed in the past 10 years that you've been working in it? Like, in the way things are done? I guess we've kind of been in that modern era for a while now, but do you feel like social media is playing more of a part? Do you feel that online networking is more important now? Like, what has changed since you've been working in the field?
Yeah, since I've been working in this industry, the biggest shift has definitely been more online, especially with the pandemic and nobody being able to leave. They had to look on the internet. And if myself as an agent, if I wasn't prepared for that, then how would anybody know how to find me, especially when they're not working in their office and I can't call them? So it has shifted hugely towards social media and content marketing, the great video you produced. So yeah, all of that has been hugely successful at gaining more people and bringing more clients in the door.
Do you feel that being a young woman in the industry is helping you differentiate?
I believe being a woman in this industry is an advantage, but you need a thick skin, and you need to have patience and you need to have integrity, and a lot of those things you can get steamrolled really easy. It's very much still a lot of older gentlemen in this industry that when they do phase out and retire, I feel like the younger kids are going to come in and really kick that tech side and the social media side into high gear. But as it stands now, we're kind of in the middle of that process.
Yeah, you kind of have to still figure out how to balance the slightly older way of doing things and creep in the new one a little bit.
Right, yeah. And then most of the time, these older, more wise people, they have a really great way of doing things. And it's worked for them in the past. But will it work in the future? And that's the question that I tend to ask, and they don't like it. But personally, I think we're always evolving and changing as an economy and as people. So I feel like I personally have to try to keep up to date with how I want to be received and how other people receive me.
It's a balance. I mean, when I work a lot in social media and the online world, and I find it still just as important to have those face-to-face personal relations. You can't just rely on that. Or if you are relying on social media and online digital marketing websites, you have to still have that personal approach to it and be a person rather than this. When you deal with companies sometimes and on a marketing discussion, they're wanting to always put the same message out and put a front on, and they've decided this is the way we're always going to talk. And then it feels robotic and weird. So it's both. You can't just do one or the other.
Yeah, it's always dynamic. Everything's always changing. One thing is certain. I know there's some proverb and saying out there, but the change is always the certain thing in life, and we have to expect change. We have to adapt in order to move forward.
What advice would you give to a woman, a girl who's wanting to go into real estate or be in a sector or an environment that stereotypically hasn't had that kind of person?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a handful of women in this industry still, and it's 2021, almost 2022. So I am very encouraging of women joining this industry. I love to mentor people as well, women especially, if they want to get into the industry. I'm the first person to offer suggestions or advice if they want it. And I just want to see people succeed. And I'm not greedy, so yeah.
That helps. I think it's always good to see it from your perspective, like say 10 years ago. And I find that if you have that humility to see that perspective and want to see change in the industry, then you have to invest your time, energy, effort within it. How do you feel that you're making change in the industry? Are you doing it, or are there things that you would like to do that you feel that can't happen right now?
Yeah, the way I approach change in the industry is, I'm a single person that tries to just lead by example and do. Personally, with the pandemic happening and the diversification of the businesses that are coming out of the woodwork and wanting to lease space, I see a huge need for some sort of guided process along the lines of startups. And that is something that has been lacking in the past. And there aren't really many resources to find how to start a business from the real estate side. So that's something that I'm actually working on right now and developing.
What do you think is the best way to make, proper, decent relationships? How do you, make that happen?
Well, for myself and social media, I post. I don't really like to, I begrudgingly post,
Yep.
but I feel like it's the one foot in the door for people to just understand and know that I'm here. The more I post, especially on LinkedIn, the more people actually come up to me in my day-to-day life and work, and they say that they see it and they appreciate it. And I had no idea that it was landing on anybody. So it's kind of nice to see that people do pay attention, even if they don't comment or like something,
Yep.
that you're still making an impact and an impression. But for me, where I thrive and survive in this industry is face-to-face meetings or on the phone. You know, I need to have that more meaningful contact. I can't just send emails and talk to people that way. I have to, I think it's more about getting a gauge of that person's integrity and trustworthiness. And I want to see that they're trustworthy just like they want to see that I'm trustworthy.
How have you found moving the online conversation to offline? Do you find that people are responsive to do that and prefer that? Are there people that don't want to and they prefer to keep it hands off?
No, everybody wants to meet. You know, despite the pandemic, despite the fact that there's an imminent risk to their health, you know, they try to protect themselves, wear a mask, and hopefully be vaccinated enough to be comfortable. But most business owners, the great part is that they thrive and survive, and they want to keep the ball moving forward. And that's what I do. I do it with them every step of the way.
It is hard. I think we were kind of forced to not do it for such a long time, and now it just feels like ready to explode. If you don't see people face to face, it's been really challenging.
Yeah, and with that comes these socially awkward moments that I have to now navigate, which is very interesting. But I get it. Like I did the same thing. So, and my kids have done the same thing. So I have the empathy to know and understand that, you know, it's not just a we can't work together thing. It's let's dive into a bit more questioning and get to know each other and explore the conversation further. And once you get into the deeper aspects of that conversation, you realize where their intentions lie and how you can help them.
Yeah, I think generally it's a positive experience, especially if you're good at that initial stage of, you know, sussing people out is the way I would put it. It's nice to really create those relationships, and like we met online and now
we
meet in person today.
Yeah.
It's nice to, you know, but we've spoken on the phone, and it's just nice to see and talk and actually, you know, relate to each other in person. It's been crazy times to, having to switch. What I do more is online, and I was doing that before, but like now it was like everybody was doing it, and I think a lot of people were choking of how to adapt to that world in that period. I know it's, you know, people are still doing it, embracing it. We have like all these systems and Microsoft Teams and all sorts of things to help us work remotely and online, but I think really a lot of people struggled to keep that personal connection going and network effectively without that personal connection.
Yeah, and we were all going through our own hurdles and challenges and mental health issues. You know, it became very apparent during the pandemic how important focus on mental health was. So, yeah, we're all in the same boat at the end of the day is kind of the gist of what I want to say, and we can all move forward together.
Absolutely. So I'd like to dig a little bit more into what you do a bit more day to day and really just pick your brains. Like, it seems like negotiating things, whatever they may be, price, lease lengths, and things about the buildings and all this, like, how do you go about conducting a negotiation? Like, what are your kind of tips and tricks that you would give someone?
You know, it's so dependent on so many factors that I don't even think I could really give tips and tricks. I mean, the first place to start is the knowledge aspect of what is the market doing? What are things transacting at, or what are the lease rates, or what are the incentives landlords are providing? There's so many different aspects to commercial, which makes it that much more difficult for a tenant or a buyer to go in and try and do it themselves.
Yeah, so tips for negotiations is really to get someone else to handle it for you.
Exactly. If you can hire somebody that you trust and that knows what your intentions and motivations are for the space that you want to either lease or buy, then that person is your advocate. And they advocate for you. They know where your bottom line is for many of the topics.
Yeah.
And you've had those conversations to go through the process of successfully landing a place.
Like when you've got a client who wants something particular and you're in that negotiation stage with a landlord or, you know, landowner or anything, like maybe give an example of things that have happened that were challenging for you.
So a few challenges, let's say lately, are tenants that want to move and the city codes have changed for building codes or building permit applications. And they say, well, I didn't have to do this before, why do I have to do it now? So there's that hurdle of just knowing how to navigate the new rules that the City of Calgary releases and how to go into a space without having this huge financial headache of, oh, well, the inspector comes out and now you have to change this, this, and that. And that's going to cost you $30,000 that you didn't budget for.
Like you can do your due diligence till the cows come home, but
until you go through the process, you never know what's going to come up. And that's where my expertise definitely helps.
Yeah, I think that's a step-by-step process as well. You kind of, leaching's the wrong word, but leaching out this information to the client so they don't get overwhelmed and they can know what's coming when they need to know, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a huge level of trust that they need to have in me. And I fully respect anybody that's ever worked with me to trust that I can get the job done, because I don't know if I could do that with somebody else. I'm not as trusting, but I'm also a trustworthy person. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that I'm able to convey my skill sets and my knowledge enough for them to not have to micromanage the process. And most of the time, these businesses they don't have the capacity or time to micromanage it or deal with it. And that's where they outsource it to somebody like me.
Yeah, I think more people are doing that because there are obviously businesses that maybe on the small or medium side that really want to know all the details, struggle to delegate, and that's why they're probably still small.
It's more of those smaller businesses, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you work with a whole range of them, I guess.
Yeah.
You have to change your tact and approach every time.
Exactly. Yeah, every time is different. I've worked with corporate, global companies. I've worked with national. I've worked with very local, small mom and pop shops. And each process is different depending on the business, which again adds a huge level of complexity to my industry and what I do.
It's quite exciting, though, that you get to turn to all these different things.
It's very exciting. And I always say I can't do a 9-to-5 desk job because of that, because I like the added element of surprise. I like the challenge, and I like solving puzzles. So it's like a real life 3D puzzle for me.
It's kind of your analytical brain coming through.
Exactly, yeah.
Like through times of hardship, typically companies or people in the search for real estate, I guess, always think they can probably strike a deal and probably be, they have the ball in their court and they can make the decisions. But is that the case in things like the pandemic?
No, it's been quite the opposite. Landlords are much more risk averse. They don't want to take a chance on a new company. They would rather have their space not leased because there's so many costs that go into trying to get your space ready for a new tenant.
So do you find that clients, maybe not clients, but your feeling of the industry, of the buyer side, has there been an element of surprise and shock?
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of guys have walked away. A lot of people, investors, business owners have just said, it's not worth it. I thought I could get a better deal because of the pandemic, and it's actually the opposite effect happening. And now availability has gone down, prices are on the rise, and we'll see what happens. We'll see who comes out to play the game.
It's amazing how quickly it's flipped, because I know, when we had that recession, oil and gas thing a few years ago, and then people were kind of leaving the downtown core, and then now it's just, back to people fighting over them again.
Yeah, well, so I should clarify the subsects of commercial real estate. There's essentially the downtown office market is its own subset of commercial. And then there's the suburban office market, which is kind of where all of the downtown guys moved into when the crap hit the fan with the oil prices dropping. So they couldn't afford to stay in those big high-rise buildings and all the amenities that came with it, and that's where, or businesses shut down because they couldn't weather the storm. And that is where all of that vacancy came from in the downtown market, separate from the suburban office market, which actually, it took a hit, but it saw a little bit of lift from those people coming out of the core and coming into the suburban areas where they don't have to pay for parking, they don't have to worry about traffic and all of the challenges around working out of the downtown core, especially if you're driving, which was one of the biggest concerns from business owners, the smaller business owners. And then from there, you have a retail market. The retail market is separate from office, suburban office and downtown office. And then you have the multifamily subset, which is more geared towards anything that's a sixplex or more is generally considered a multifamily commercial project. And then there's what I do, which is industrial. And then from there, there's actually the land side of things, which can be commercial, it can be industrial, it can be agricultural. And then have to know how to navigate all of the zoning and how to go through the process of rezoning or subdividing, or how to incorporate services when there's no services because you're on an agricultural farm. So there's a lot of different areas, and most people in my industry that I know specialize in an area, which I find huge value in.
So what are your thoughts when a company is either considering buying or leasing, let's say, industrial real estate?
I like to give options. So if somebody says, I want to lease a space, the first question I'll ask is, have you considered if you could buy a space? Because I find there's major advantages to buying and leasing out a space to your own company, and the tax savings that come along with it during tax time are pretty significant. And a lot of people don't know that, or they haven't talked to their accountant about it. And I always try to give them all of that information up front. So especially now that the interest rates are still quite a bit lower than in previous years, it's much more attractive to buy and be able to afford a mortgage with a 3% interest rate.
That must vary on the size of the company, though, because if it's small businesses,
Correct.
they're not going to have the ability to borrow and have the capital to buy. But
Yes.
Would that vary on the size of the company?
Absolutely. And if it's a startup company, generally there's no way they're going to buy. And that's okay. Establish yourself, see if there's a market for your business, and take it from there. Because there's always room to grow and room to explore that avenue, let's say in 5 years, when you have a bit more working capital.
Do you find doing what you do, you become more integrated with businesses that you work with more regularly? Do they touch base with you when they're looking to expand? Do you advise them on a growth, not a strategy, but growth planning, I guess?
The businesses that I work with and businesses in Calgary on the industrial side are very hard to track and very hard to understand how they're going to be in a year or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. So in those instances, I just say when the time is right, when you reassess your business and you realize that you don't have enough space for what you need to do, then let's have a conversation around it. If they can catch it before that, great. Most people don't or can't, just based on these economic challenges that arise, especially the ones that we don't see coming, like a pandemic.
But I was just intrigued to see how involved a commercial real estate person, industrial real estate, was involved with helping a business say, well, are you not going to need to grow? Do you not need to look to get a bigger place? How involved are you in advising them on those sorts of things?
I am as involved as I can be. If let's say a company in the pandemic doesn't need all of their space, I can help them to market their space for sublet. Let's say even a portion. If you want to do a chalk line deal and not necessarily spend a bunch of costs on demising walls, you can do it that way, where you have somebody like me market the space, but it's not necessarily the full space.
Do you find companies are doing that more and more? Like looking for that alternative business model for their office spaces?
I don't think people know it exists. I feel like a lot of people breeze through their lease agreement and they're like, oh, all this legal mumbo jumbo stuff, and they sign away, or they have their lawyer review and then they sign off on it. They don't know the terms that they can actually achieve through the lease and what the landlord is allowing them to do in that space. And a lot of times you can sublease the entire space and recover all of that cash and not have it sitting vacant. A lot of these companies have vacant spaces, especially office right now. There's a lot of vacant office space and people working from home and trying to isolate, or, unfortunately getting sick and having to stay home. And in those instances where you think in the short term or long term you won't need that space, then why not try to recover your costs? I just don't get why more people aren't seeking that out as an option.
I think, the default is for people to just see it as, oh, it's a cost. I just have to bear it until times are better.
Correct. Yeah. Or they feel like, well, it's a pandemic. People probably aren't looking. And there's a lot of people looking. There's a lot of, even on the film side, the film industries, they're leasing office spaces.
When you're looking to advise a client, are you helping them understand, the potential upside to their real estate investment, or is it, because that's more of a real estate for the residential market probably, but like when you're obviously like a building unit someone's going to use for a long time, it's probably not as much in the conversation. But obviously with like a piece of land, or I'm just looking to see what you think in terms of it being a good investment financially to grow, as an asset.
So in the case of land, as the example, there are certain parcels of land that are highly sought after, and those are the ones that are kind of within the boundaries between either a city and a town, or between what we call an area structure plan. So it's something that has been slated to be developed eventually and to be zoned as a certain type of land, whether that's commercial or industrial. But right now it's kind of in holding. And a lot of investors look to buy that land as a long-term investment strategy because the carrying costs of buying that land are very minimal. You pay property taxes on land, which is next to nothing in the grand scheme of things.
Is that a more worthy investment if you're looking to have that kind of return and that kind of asset, rather than it being a building that's going to help you house your business and run your business, but like as a commercial investment property? Like, is it better to seek land out rather than?
Land is limited, and so are buildings. But buildings typically turn over faster than a parcel of land would. It really just depends on the investor, how savvy they are, how much real estate investing they've done in their past. A lot of the times it's the guys that have been in this industry of real estate investing for many, many years that start to branch out and do these different ways of creating value or seeing the long-term potential in something. But for a new investor or new first-time buyer, let's say, that's like, maybe I want to operate a business out of here, maybe I don't, or maybe I'll use 25% of the space for my company and 75% can be for 3 other tenants. And that's been hugely valuable right now. A lot of people are looking for that type of scenario where they can recoup some of those costs on the mortgage, but also operate and have those tax advantages to owning. So in that case, I think the least risky way to do it is to have a more diverse tenant base in the building. So let's say 5 or 6 tenants, and they have a certain term of lease left, and they may have a renewal option in their lease to stay for another 5 years. So now you have more or less guaranteed income for 5 to 10 years.
It's really cool.
It's very complicated. I'm trying to explain it so that it makes sense.
Yeah.
But there's so many different types of investors too, just like tenants and buyers, that is essentially where I'll have a 2-hour conversation with you about it one day over beers or something.
Yeah, sounds good. So stereotypically, women are better multitaskers than men. That's what I always hear. So how do you balance multitasking all these different clients? Do you have things that you routinely use to help you along, whether it's strategies, software, processes, like just intrigued to pick your brains on it?
Yeah, well, there's articles out there that say multitasking is not effective. I am very much a scientific person, and I base all of my information that I go off of, and I live my life based on scientific evidence of things or articles, or medical journals. In that case, since multitasking is not really an option, the best plan of attack is to be very organized, which I'm not so much in my personal life, but in the office setting, I am much more organized and careful and thought out, because I know the exact process of what we're going to do, and I know the timing of which it's going to happen. So it's basically just keeping everything organized and writing everything down. I write everything in my phone. I put everything in the calendar. If it's not in my calendar, I am going to forget about it in 10 seconds. It's terrible, but I am heavily reliant on my phone and technology to remind me.
Like when you're working in a team environment, are you generally the sole person that deals with the client and you have a team that support you? Or do you all have your own individual properties and you just kind of perform under the kind of cost center or something similar?
Yeah, in our case, for my team, we're more supportive. So let's say somebody has to take time off with a sick child, then one of us can swoop in and take over. And it's usually pretty quick to update each other, since we know how the industry works and we know how the deals all flow, that we can kind of pick up where they left off and keep the ball moving forward, so that businesses can keep moving forward and get into a space without having to worry about any setbacks.
So I'd like to get a little bit into development of yourself and how you've grown over the years. Like has mentoring or having someone to look up to learn the tips and tricks of the trade and how to do things, or even see what not to do, and like has that been part of your development?
Not really. Mentors in my industry don't really exist. I think I'm probably, in my opinion, the biggest mentor of anybody I know.
Yep.
And I try to be accessible for people, that are working in my industry, and I want to see them succeed. And I don't want them to have all the challenges I had, but at the same time, jumping in with 2 feet and not looking back and just working through is the only way to get through anything in life, in my opinion. And it's like starting a business. If you start a business, you can't go and ask everybody for advice and then say, okay, well, now that I've picked and selected all this stuff, I'm going to pool all their ideas together and use that model to work. Like, it's so dependent on the person and how you operate and how you think, that mentorship only goes so far. And that's what the team is good for too, is just support on if I have a question that I've never encountered, or a problem or a hurdle, that I can ask for advice. But at the same time, you learn by doing. And that's what I try to do. I lead by example, and I try to teach my kids that you don't get better at something until you try and do.
Yeah, I believe mistakes are a big part of that. Like, the amount of things I've done wrong, I'm generally pretty good at learning not to do them again. But like, I'm like, oh crap, I've done that. Oh crap, I've done that. Like, over time, you're like, but then you look back and you're in a scenario and go, oh, I did that last time, I won't do that again. And the next thing is just better. I love making mistakes because of that. Like, it's a bit embarrassing at the time, maybe, for certain situations. But like, I just think I've learned so much from diving in, like you say, and just having a go. Do you feel that running things like your own business is making you more accountable for managing that risk and being healthy about it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think if you aren't doing that, you're lying. You're lying to yourself. You're not going to get anywhere, or you're going to get frustrated and hit a wall and then have to change career paths.
What do you think about people that think there's job security, like, at all? I find that that's a bit of a false protection around you, that you think you're going to get a job and work for somebody, and I feel if you don't have that mentality to look after yourself and grow and treat yourself as not really a business in a way, but like your own personal identity in the business world. I just wonder what you think around people that might be deciding between, having that kind of job, working for someone else forever, or like just having that mentality to be more self-sufficient.
Yeah, well, like you just said, it's a mental shift, and that can take years. It could take people their entire life to figure it out or not. So to have or make a conscious choice away from, let's say, being an employee to trying to venture out to start your own business is a huge mental shift, and it comes with a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of stress, the blood, sweat, tears that everybody talks about. But ultimately, you have to go through that, and you have to hit somewhat of a rock bottom in order to rebuild and understand why you need to rebuild. And the why is the critical part.
Yeah, I think going to that point where the only way is up is probably quite beneficial in a way.
Right, because then you're actually working through it because of the why and not how. How will happen, how it has to happen. I think that sorts itself out, but the proponent to starting a new business is why, and what's the purpose.
What's the why for you?
The why for me, oh gosh, curveball question. The why for me is I always want to help. I think I've been put on this earth to serve. I know it sounds corny probably, but
you want to help people.
I want to help people, and I didn't know how. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So when people suggested I should go into real estate, I thought, okay, well, that's a way to help people that they don't know something that I might have the skill set for, then I can serve. So at the end of the day, I'm a servant, and that's what I enjoy doing. I like to see people enjoy and reap the benefit of having that approach. And I've been told many times that the way that I do things and the way I serve people and my attention to detail is very different from other experiences they've had, which is a nice feeling because that's validation that I'm doing my job right.
Yeah, wanting the best for someone, I don't think you can go wrong. Putting yourself in their shoes, treating things like it's your project is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So like you deal with a multitude of businesses, and I like to focus on the small one just because of where I come from. Like how have you seen the small business market, and how did they go into real estate? Because I imagine it's quite daunting when you've not been involved in it before, you don't know the process, you've bought a house before probably, but the commercial and industrial world seems like such a savanna of, what the hell, where do I go?
Yeah.
What's your experience dealing with those size of companies?
Yeah, so most of the companies looking right now or that connect online are startups, or they're somebody that has an existing business. They have this accessory business that they would like to start and launch, but they want to have a different space for it. They want to keep it separate from their other business. So in that instance, the first place that they should be looking is not for a space necessarily. Like a lot of people want to look for the space to kind of get a guideline on the budget and the price and what the market's saying. And that's where I say, call me first if you can, if you know me. Talk to me or somebody that has their pulse on the market and chat about what are the costs involved to start up, how much of a build out you might need, or what kind of additions or modifications in a space, or how much are the property taxes, how much are the overhead costs for, let's say, a property management company. All of these factor into the overall budget. And most people, when they want to find a place for their business, don't think to start there. They think, let's look at a space, see if I can find the number for that monthly rate, which doesn't exist online. So there's not very user-friendly search engines for commercial properties. And that's where talking to somebody like myself, you can get an idea. Like I'll talk to somebody, they say, I'm looking for 1,000 square feet, let's say. It's a startup company, they only need 1,000 square feet. And I say, how do you know that's how much you need? Well, I don't know how much I need because I've never started a business like this. Okay, so what's your budget? Well, I don't know my budget. What's the market saying? Okay, well, let me tell you, for 1,000 square foot space, this is how much you're gonna pay per month. Let's say it's $3,500 a month. And I usually try to give an all-in cost, including GST and utilities. And I say, this is what you could budget for, or between $3,500 to $4,500 a month. And when they say, whoa, I can't afford that. Okay, well, let's step it down. Let's step down your size requirement to match the budget. But the budget is ultimately the number that we have to work with in the beginning. And most businesses don't know what that budget is going to be.
So when you give that kind of realization, do you find companies coil back and go, maybe I'm not ready for that yet?
Absolutely. I've had a lot of companies or business owners or startups contact me and say, wow, I had no idea. I had no idea that getting a license to a permit to occupy a space would take 3 months. I don't have time for that. I don't have money for that. And so I'm very upfront with how much cost it'll take to get your business started.
So I'm intrigued, like how do you as a real estate person make money out of that transaction?
Oh, okay. So how we are compensated, and I'm very upfront about it, we're paid by the seller or the landlord. We don't typically, as the industry as a whole, does not ask for a fee from a buyer or a tenant. We get paid once something happens. So I don't get paid until the very, very end, and that tenant has moved in. That's when I'll get paid. Yeah, so I do a lot of free work, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But I'm here to serve.
Sounds like well, in the initial instance, maybe not now, but maybe it's a cash flow nightmare probably.
Yeah.
Just kind of not knowing where stuff's going to come in. And
yeah, it's you don't get paid until you successfully place somebody where they want to be.
When you talk about being, positive, helpful, and patient, like it seems like you are that kind of person already. But have you adjusted the mentality to be even more so now, to make the transactions go better? And did you see business was better because you adapted your not personality, but the way you did things?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when the driver is to make money, you're never really going to succeed at life. So I had to take a pause and say, do I need a second job or do I need a third job to support what I'm trying to achieve with this full-time career? And because of that, I was able to pace myself a bit more, budget a bit better, and come out at the other end much more in a more consultant and patient role, and be able to really be attentive to that person and business owner's needs.
And do you find the commission setup, is that beneficial? Do you think that helps you do your business?
No, I think it's terrible, but it is the name of the game. And, there's other ways to structure my business.
What are the alternatives? I'm intrigued.
I mean, the alternatives, and I have to dance very lightly around this, but, some people will become a consultant and say, I can do the real estate side of things for you, but I can also do the consulting side, and I'll charge a consulting fee. So that's some ways that brokers and real estate agents make money on the side, is by doing consulting work. I've thought about it. I would rather approach the masses with a website and a form for them to fill out, which is what I'm trying to develop at the moment, just to streamline the process so that when it comes time to get their permits and to go through that due diligence period, that everything can run a bit smoother.
So before you go, we didn't really touch on what you like to do outside of real estate.
Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't touch on that. I'm kidding. No, I'm so busy with my children that everything is around them. I try to incorporate as much as I can for balance and mindful activities, let's say. I'll try to do some yoga or working out in that sense. But my kids have full-time activities that they're in and full-time school, and being a mom is first priority for me. So I think to have a job that complements that schedule is essentially why I went into this career too, to have that freedom of time.
And it complements you because it's flexible.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks, Kaile, for taking the time to chat with me today. You mentioned LinkedIn and website. What are the best ways to get in touch with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is my biggest source of, I think, interest from business owners. But aside from that, it's just a plain old phone call. I'd rather talk to somebody or see them face to face than type behind a keyboard, behind a computer, and talk to them that way.
Thanks for everyone for watching. If you want to find out more about Kaile, please check the description below or above or wherever it might be. But please be sure to not subscribe to this channel. I do not want any more subscribers. I have far too many. Please like other channels, go to other pages and comment how bad my channel is. And I hopefully won't see you in the next video. Thanks so much. Bye.